Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. You know, it's cold outside, we're in the middle of winter, and spring may feel like it's so far away, but it really is time now to start planting the garden, and I personally am very thankful that it is time to start planting the garden because that's something that gives me hope for spring. Helps me get through these cold winter months where I don't really want to spend a lot of time outside because honestly I don't really like being cold. But I really miss being outside. I miss the warmth of spring. So, as I said, it's time to start planting the garden. Now, over the next couple weeks, I'm planning to do a series of videos on garden planting, and specifically, we're going to focus a lot of our attention on seed starting. You know, when it comes to planting your garden, or actually comes time to plant your spring garden, you have two main options. One is to start your plants from seed, and the second is to buy transplants. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those options, and I'm going to give you guys a little spoiler, which is that I greatly prefer to start the majority of my plants from seed, but there are a couple exceptions, and we'll talk about that at the end of this video. So first, let's just jump into what I consider the advantages of starting from seed. The first advantage that I want to mention to starting at least the majority of your garden from seed is that it can save you a lot of money. Now, if you go down to your local plant nursery or your local box store, you know, in spring, you're going to find transplants for sale everywhere, and a lot of them are going to be big and beautiful and tempting, and in many cases also fairly expensive. You know, you can buy a single tomato plant for $5, sometimes more than that, depending on the size of the plant, depending on the variety of the plant, on the size of the pot it's in. There's a lot of variations. But in most cases, you can expect to spend a minimum of $3, often more than that, for the reasons I mentioned. Additionally, if you're buying organically grown starts, you're going to most likely pay even more for that. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, and if you're only growing one tomato plant, it really isn't. But if you're someone like me who likes to grow dozens of tomato plants, that couple dollars a plant can add up really quickly. And honestly, in a lot of cases, you can buy a single seed pack, which is going to come with probably a minimum of 10 seeds, maybe upwards of 20, 30, even more seeds than that, for the same price as a single transplant. So you can certainly save yourself a lot of money by starting from seed. Now, of course, there are some startup costs associated with starting from seed. You're going to need containers to grow your plants in, you're going to need soil, you're going to need some sort of lighting system. But honestly, many of those things can be done really inexpensively. Containers can be reused if you either buy high quality containers or you can reuse containers from nursery plants you've bought in the past. You can even use plastic drinking cups to start your seeds in. There's just so many options. I do just want to mention, if you are using cups or a type of container like yogurt containers or something like that that is not intended for seed starting, you do just want to make sure that you poke some drainage holes in that so that your plants don't end up drowning. But that being said, there are so many options for starting seeds, so many options for containers that will be inexpensive or in many cases even free. Now, soil will be a little bit of a startup cost, but honestly, when you compare it to the amount that you'd spend on transplants, I think even that is a fairly negligible cost. So if it's your first year growing from seed and you don't have a seed starting setup yet, you may want to invest in some sort of lighting system, but honestly, that does not need to be as expensive as it sounds. You can get really fancy grow light systems that will probably give you amazing results, but honestly, what I use is just some cheap shop lights that use regular fluorescent bulbs that I can just get at my local hardware store. And I purchased those lights used, so I saved even more. I just found a deal, it was years ago, I think it was on Facebook or something like that, and I just found a great deal. Those grow really well for me, my plants grow really strong and healthy, and while I honestly probably could get even better results if I had a true grow light, I'm perfectly happy with the results that I get with my cheap little shop lights. So the second big advantage to starting your plants from seed at home yourself, and this is honestly probably my favorite advantage and the main reason why, or one of the main reasons why I like to start a lot of my own seeds, is just the varieties that are available. Now you can see I have my seed collection here. This is not even my entire seed collection, but let's pull out, you know what, we'll talk about tomatoes because tomatoes are my favorite plant to grow in the garden. But I'm just going to pull out, I'm not even going to pull out all my seed packets, but just look at the amazing variety that I have here. Now, if you go down to your local nursery or your local box store or home improvement store, wherever you find to get started transplants, you're going to find, maybe 5 or 6 varieties. Maybe if it's a local nursery, especially if it specializes in heirlooms, you may find a few more varieties than that. But honestly, if you purchase your own seeds, you're going to be amazed at the variety available. And honestly, that was just tomatoes. I have this whole seed bin here, and I have a second one underneath. And honestly, I could probably use a little more space for my seeds. I will say, kind of going back to advantage number 1, if your primary focus in gardening is to save money, you may not want to grow as much variety as I do. You could certainly get by with just a couple different tomato varieties. If you want a slicer variety, a paste variety, and a cherry tomato variety, you could get by with just that, and it would be completely fine, depending on your goal. You may not even need that much variety. I could grow my entire garden of tomato plants with just one seed packet that would cost me maybe $3 if I didn't want all the variety that I have. So honestly, that's a little bit of a splurge. But I do want to mention also, these seed packets here, for example, this one has 25 seeds in it, and this is a fancy heirloom variety. If you just got a common cheap variety, you could certainly pay even less than I did. But for this heirloom variety, there's 25 seeds in here. I could, in theory, if I get perfect germination, get 25 plants just from this seed packet, which I think cost me maybe $3 or $4. Now, I'm not going to grow 25 plants of just this variety this year. I may grow 2. But these seeds will still be good next year and the year after that. As long as you store your seeds properly, depending on the type of plant that they are, you can often get many years out of your seeds, which means that if I decide to grow this variety again next year, I don't have to buy seeds for it. I can just use what I have left this year. So even though I do have a really extensive seed collection, I don't need to buy all those seeds every year. I can just save what I have left over. That is another way to save money with growing seeds. I know I kind of am jumping around a little bit, and that was a little bit of benefit 1 and 2 kind of mixed together. But when you see the variety, I promise, if you haven't looked at seed catalogs before, I promise you will be amazed by the variety offered. The next advantage to starting from seed is that you have a lot more control over how your plants are grown. There's kind of a little bit more of a push towards organic gardening lately, but it isn't completely mainstream. A lot of times it is more challenging to find plant starts that are grown organically, and even if you are able to find them, they most likely will be more expensive. And again, the variety selection may be limited. If you start your plants yourself, you have complete control. You have control over what soil you use. You have control over what fertilizer you use, whatever you use for pest control or anything like that. You get to decide what goes on your plants and what doesn't go on your plants. Now, kind of going along with control over how your plants are grown, you also have control over the timing. Now, you'll find that local transplants are usually offered at a certain time of year, and pretty much just that time of year only. You may have a few weeks, maybe even a month or 2 of window to buy those plants, depending on your area. But if you start your own plants, you've got those seeds, you can start them whenever you want to. I find this especially useful for fall gardening. In the spring, when everyone's in gardening mode, it's easy to find plants. Plants are everywhere. A lot of times in the fall, though, not as many people seem to be as interested in fall gardening, or at least the stores aren't as interested in marketing to people for fall gardening. So often it's really hard to find plants to plant in your fall garden. If you have all your seed starting supplies and your seeds and everything in your house, you can just start your own plants for your fall garden. You can start them whenever you want. You can also adjust timing. Maybe you want to use some kind of season extension and give your plants a little bit of an earlier start. If you have, for example, a grow tunnel and you can plant your plants out a little bit earlier, if you have individual season extenders like maybe a cloche or some other frost fabric, some way to plant your plants a little bit earlier, you may want to start your own seeds so that you have them ready to go into the ground a little bit earlier, and that can just give you a little more jump on the season. One other advantage I want to mention, and this honestly may be a little bit subjective, but for me it's an advantage, is that I just really enjoy seed starting. I kind of tend to go a little bit stir crazy in the winter, especially towards the end of the winter when I really feel like it should be spring, but the weather outside just doesn't agree with me. And I just really want to get in my garden and work with my plants. seed starting gives me that connection to my garden and allows me to start working on my garden and start dreaming of spring and the harvest that I'm going to get a little bit earlier. You know, if I waited until it was actually time to plant plants in the garden, I went out and bought plants, I would have to wait just that much longer to be able to get into gardening mode. So by starting my plants a little bit earlier inside, it helps me feel a little bit more connection to the plants, and it helps me get started a little bit earlier. The final reason I'm going to mention today that I really prefer to start my own plants from seed, and honestly this is more of a compelling reason recently, is just that I think it's a really useful skill to have. You know, gardening is a skill set. Being able to grow your own food is a really important skill. I mean, we all saw when everything happened in 2020, grocery store shelves in many cases were a lot more limited in supply than they normally were. A lot of people really began gardening at that time, and a lot of people kind of felt the push to both source things locally and to grow their own food. Now, in the case of anything like that happening again, I just think it's a really important skill to have, to know how to grow your own food, and specifically seed starting. Now, if you have mastered the skills of gardening, but you haven't started your own seeds, if you've only purchased transplants locally, then knowing how to start your own seeds and nurture those seeds until they're ready to go out in the ground, that could be a really great next step and another really important skill to learn. I find that, honestly, I do it because I really enjoy it, but it brings me peace of mind to know that I do have that skill in case I ever need it. So now, all of that being said, you can see why I prefer to grow the vast majority of the plants in my garden from seed, but there are some exceptions. I don't grow 100% of what I grow from seed. I do purchase some transplants, and I'm just going to mention what those exceptions are in my case. You may have different exceptions in your case, and you may just not want to start all your own plants from seed. That's completely fine. I'm just sharing the reasons why I like to. But these are the exceptions that I make. The first is perennial herbs. Now, perennial herbs, the reason that I prefer to buy started plants of those, there's a couple of reasons actually. One is that that's not something that I buy every year. Many perennial herbs, you know, as they say perennial, will live for many years in my garden. You know, thyme, oregano, sage, lemon balm, peppermint, all of those plants, you can buy a started plant once, plant them in your ground, and depending on your area, they'll come back year after year. Now, in my area, I'm in zone 6, and all of the plants that I mentioned, also chives, I forgot to mention chives. Those plants all come back year after year reliably in my area. Now, rosemary doesn't overwinter in my area, but I think if you're maybe one zone south of me, rosemary will overwinter for you as well. So because I don't need to buy new plants of those every year, I find that I don't really need to start them from seed. I don't really need to have 15 oregano plants. I find that one suits my needs perfectly well. So it's honestly, for those kind of plants, it's just as economical for me to buy started plants. Also, some of those plants, while I have not personally started many of them from seed, I have heard they're a little bit challenging to start from seed. So since I have the local nursery available to me and I can just purchase plants there, that's what I do whenever I need to replace any of those plants in my garden. It's also great to know that your local nursery is there in case you have any sort of seedling failure or crop failure. Now, I've had years where there's been certain types of plants I've attempted to start from seed. They either haven't germinated, they've germinated but just done really poorly, I've done something and killed them, or just for whatever reason. The nursery is there as a great backup. I know a couple years ago, something happened to all my cauliflower seedlings. They just really didn't do well, and I knew I wasn't going to get any kind of great harvest from them. So I ended up purchasing cauliflower seedlings at my local nursery, and they did great for me. So if I didn't have that as an option, I just wouldn't have been able to have cauliflower that year. So I definitely keep the nursery in mind as a backup for any plants I have that just don't do well for me or that I need to replace. Another reason I'll sometimes buy a transplant at my local nursery is that sometimes I just change my mind impulsively and I decide, you know what, I want to try growing this year, whatever plant it may be, something that I didn't have seeds for, I didn't start on time, and at that point it would be too late for me to get a transplant started. I can go to my local nursery or home improvement store or whatever, and I can see if they have seedlings for that plant available, and if they do, then I can go ahead and grow that plant that it would have been too late for me to start from seed. So that's another instance where I would purchase a transplant locally. One other exception that is specific to this year is onions. If you've been following along with me for any length of time, you know that onions are my nemesis. I have really struggled growing sizable onions. I decided this year to try a new approach. I ordered some onion transplants, so I'm going to be getting a bulk order of onion plants in the mail, and I'm going to try growing onions that way this year and see if I'm any more successful. Because of that, I'm not going to be starting any onion seeds myself this year. Now, I am hoping, if I have success with those onion transplants, I am hoping to try again growing onions from seed in the future, but for this year, that's my plan. So I'm not going to be starting any onion seeds this year. The final reason that I'm going to mention that I do sometimes buy local transplants is just impulse buys. You know, sometimes I like to go to the local nursery. I like to support local businesses. And when I go walk around the nursery, sometimes I see something that just looks beautiful and just calls out to me, even though I didn't think to start it myself, or maybe I did and their version just looks better than mine. For whatever reason, I think that buying an impulse buy here and there, I think that's fine. You know, I'm sure that I will end up with a handful of transplants that just call my name at my local nursery, and I'll end up growing those too. So that's my list of exceptions for things that I don't grow from seed. But as I said, for the most part, I really do prefer to grow from seed. And if growing from seed is something that is new to you, it can seem intimidating just because it's something that you haven't done before. Honestly, I promise you, it's a lot easier than it seems. And I'm going to be doing a whole series, as I said, over the next couple weeks on this channel, where we're just going to talk about different aspects of seed starting so that you feel completely prepared for that process. So if that's something that you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to check back. I encourage you to subscribe and stay tuned, because I'm really excited about this whole seed starting series, and I'm even more excited to start my seeds, which we will definitely do together when the time comes. So if you have any other advantages or disadvantages that you want to mention about starting seeds, go ahead and leave those in the comments, because I would love to hear why you start from seed or why you don't start from seed. And if there's any particular plant that you love to start from seed or don't love so much to start from seed, I'd love to hear that too. So I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.